Welcome to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I'm your host, Daryl Scott, and together we will dive into the lives and careers of the jazz legends who have left a rhythmic imprint on the world. Be prepared to reminisce on the highs and the lows of their musical journey and the trials that sculpted their timeless musical gems. We'll preserve the legacy of these extraordinary maestros and find inspiration in the melodies of their lives. Subscribe now and never miss a beat. Now, let's get to the show. Welcome, everybody. I'm Daryl Scott. You are listening and watching the Jazz Flyte Podcast. On this particular episode, remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked to a guy named Tony Lapuzzi. First of all, Tony's Mr. Energy. And between the laughter that you heard and all the things, he suggested several other musicians relatively in the San Antonio area, which creates another question for me. One of his, I'm going to say, best friends, and I think our guests will chime in on that, is BillyRay Sheppard. And let me say this. So the last name Sheppard, I thought had one spelling. I was spelling it one way with only one P and whatever. And then I actually go to the website and I'm like, I've been doing this all wrong. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, BillyRay Sheppard, by way of San Antonio, Texas, where it is warm. It's not warm here.
Well,
Billy,
hey, man, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on the show. And you're absolutely right. Tony is a dear friend of mine, and but as far as the weather, man, today I don't know how much you know about Texas weather, man, but they say if you don't like it, just stick around because it'll change.
Oh yeah,
so
same thing here.
Today it's I think it's maybe 33, 34, and so I don't know how cold it is there, but for Texas, man, I'm not happy right now, but and last week we had some 70-degree weather. It's like, man, I don't know.
Tell Stories of Travels, it's 25 here right now, and the wind is blowing.
No.
The funny thing is, I'm in my office, so out of my one window, there's a tree, and there must be 40 robins in the tree. And I'm thinking, don't birds fly south when it's this cold? No, they've just gathered in there, and they don't look any fat or anything, but they're out there.
Yeah.
So Billy, how did you get started in this crazy world of music?
Well, I've always loved music. I'm not sure why I've always had an interest for music, but I've always loved it. Because I didn't have any real musicians in my family. I had an aunt that used to sing in church, and that was it. But growing up here in Texas, football.
Yes.
And band was always big, even as early as, elementary school. And I remember the kids, getting to leave early to go to games. So I always wanted to play football and be in the band. I wanted to do either or both,
Mm-hmm.
But I grew up with my grandmother, who was born in 1911. So she had a completely different perspective on how she wanted me to grow up and the things she wanted me to pursue. So sports and entertainment, music was off the table, even at that early age. It was like, no, you're gonna study, you're gonna do this. This is what you're gonna do with your opportunities. And so that was fine and good. That was her dream for me, but it wasn't coming from my heart. So I always wanted to play music. So I never got a chance. And then in my high school, once I got to high school, and started thinking about, I'm going to go to college eventually. And I started looking at colleges that I thought might have have a football team, but not really high priority, something where I wouldn't, I could play, but wouldn't, because I had never played, it would be something that I could, participate in at a college that it wasn't their main thing. So in talking to her about that, and she saw, okay, well, this kid's going to leave and go play football somewhere. She decided to buy me a saxophone, and she got me a horn, and I've been playing ever since, man. It came with a a little book that showed you where to put your fingers and how to put the reed on the mouthpiece and all of that. And I did that, and I had a cousin that lived with us who was 16 years older than me, and she had a few records. She had like a Boss Gags album.
Mm-hmm.
She had an Ohio Players album.
Oh, okay.
She had the Grover Washington Mr. Magic album.
Mm-hmm.
She had a couple of Crusaders, you know.
Okay.
And so, once I figured out how to produce a sound, I just eventually started, trying to play what I heard those musicians playing on the albums, And one thing just led to another. I got good enough. I would go to some jam sessions, and I got good enough and comfortable enough with the horn to join some blues bands. And blues band was the first organized group that I became a member of. So I played blues for a long time, and then went from blues to like reggae. Played reggae for 6 or 7 years, and then left that band. Went to a country band. Played with them for another 6 years.
Wow.
And then after that, I went to a top 40 band, a corporate band. And it was with that band that, it was a great band. The money was great. But whenever the money wasn't good,
right,
they would leave the sax player at home, And so I was like, man, I got to figure out how I can be in control of when I get work and when I don't.
Right.
And so I started trying to develop kind of a frontman image, and I called some musicians and tried to put some material together, and so years later, here I am.
Well, here's what's interesting to me, and I never really knew this until I talked to, and I don't know how far Houston, I think is where he played. Houston is to you, but I talked to Kirk Whalen, and Kirk is from Memphis, so you have that Memphis sound. But in Texas, I think of Crusaders, especially Wilton Felder.
Wilton Felder, man.
Yeah. So does any of that filter into your playing, or did you at one point go, I need to pay attention to these guys because these are the guys that are doing what I want to do?
It was pretty much exposure. It was, I had a limited exposure, but it was a good exposure. Wilton Felder, I mean, that was the cat, him and Grover were the guys that I was listening to when I first started. And I do think that because it was such an early exposure for me to Wilton Felder, I do think his sound has a huge impact. Now, my style of playing, especially what's recorded, is slightly different. You might be challenged to hear the influence of Wilton Felder, but knowing how I play and certain things that I've done that haven't been recorded, I definitely know and feel that Wilton Felder had an influence in my sound and my tone. That Texas tenor sound is real, and it's huge. And being self-taught, one of the advantages that I had early on was, it's going to sound crazy, but not knowing what I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know that there were all these other components of music that I should have been working on. All I knew was what my horn sounded like when I played it,
right,
and what other horns sounded like when other people played it. So I spent a lot of time listening to cats and trying to get the sound in my head to come through my horn.
right. And
as a result of that, I think I've developed a really good tone on the horn. I'm happy with the tone and the sound of my voice through the instrument. So yeah, man, the Texas tenor sound is a real thing. I think Arnett Cobb, who's also an influence on, if I'm not mistaken, on Kirk Whalum too.
Hmm.
Um, Wilton Felder, and there's a list, man. There were a couple of cats that were in the they weren't in the smooth jazz, but they were in the regular jazz world that lived here in San Antonio. That's Clifford Brown,
Hmm.
Mr. Honky Tonk. He was kind of a jazz. He kind of bridged the gap between jazz and blues. But man, he was a great jazz tenor player. I could hear him just about any time. Uh, that was Clifford Scott, and then the other gentleman, um, his name, I can see his face, but it'll come to me. But
Hmm.
yeah, tenor players have a long history of great influence in the blues and jazz genre of music. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. There are certain musicians, and especially saxophone players, they can play two notes and you know who it is.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
it's funny to me, and I used to get kind of try to test myself to play this and be blinded
Hmm.
and try to figure out who that person is.
Sure,
And
sure.
then after a while, it's like there's too many of these cats going out here. I can't get to all of them.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting. It was even tough to, as I say, if you're playing Kirk Whalum, it was tough to go to, I'll say David Sanborn.
Hmm.
Um, but they're both very unique, but they both have their own style of playing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is having talked to both of those individuals, even their conversation
Hmm.
reflects their personality. It's
Sure.
so funny. Kirk and I have become pretty good friends, and he gets on me, and he would get on you because we share one of the same things, and it's this stuff called gray hair on our face. He's like that's experience, Daryl. I
Yeah.
go, that's the first time I've heard that, Kirk. He goes, oh, nope, that's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna call it. You have a lot more experience than a whole lot of people because you got all that gray hair and stuff. Um,
I'll take it. I did recall the name, and I want to mention it because I don't want to not mention this gentleman. Both the guy I mentioned earlier, Clifford Scott, he's passed away, but the other gentleman that's passed away that was a huge influence as far as listening and trying to pick up what I could is a tenor player named Spot Barnett,
oh,
and
never.
they're from an older
Right.
timeline. You can look them up in your leisure. And but yeah, those guys were right here. But yeah, I didn't want to. Sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to get his name in there because
Right.
it came to me, and I wanted to. Yeah, I
Not
wanted to
not
put
a
that.
problem. One of the things we do here is we give people a sample
Hmm.
of music that you've played. When we opened the show, we played "It's the Weekend." How much I wish for that right now.
Yeah.
Um, but now we're going to go to Moscato Moon.
All right.
I'm curious about the title, especially that first word, Moscato.
Hmm.
Can you help me out? Why was that? Stop laughing. Why is that in the title?
Well, oh yeah, man. It's okay. It's not necessarily a glamorous story, but story nonetheless. My wife is a huge wine drinker.
Hmm.
I shouldn't say huge. She enjoys, you
Right,
know, a glass of wine, and she's
right,
kind of introduced me to different wines. And I don't really know one from the other.
right.
And but I here in Texas in the last few years, Texas and the Hill Country has had a, a blossom of wine vineyards or wine venues and
Right.
such.
Oh yeah.
And so I've been doing a lot of playing at in the Hill Country, and you know it's something about the culture, the wine culture, being outside and in the Hill Country. It's a lot of winding roads, and there are these moons, and I don't know
Hmm.
what moon it is, but there are these nights, and I'm sure you've seen them, when the moon is so full and so bright, it seems like you could almost touch it.
Touch it, yes.
But that's not always the time. I mean, it doesn't always
Right.
appear that way. Most of the time it's in its normal spot. But there are times when driving in the hill country, on the winding roads and the narrow lanes, and I've seen the moon out there, and it's like it's right there. And I guess it just happened to be one of those moons that, and we've been talking about wine and it just everything aligned, and I was like, oh man, that moon is right there. That's my moon. That's my Moscato Moon, and that just kind of influenced the song. It's a great time, and it's just a great vibe. It's about an experience of driving and the culture of wine drinking and enjoying some of the finer things of life, man.
Nice.
And nighttime for me, tends to slow down a bit, and you get to focus on what's important.
Right.
And because there's less of the hustle and bustle of the AM struggle. And so all of that, man, it just creates a vibe, and it's a great energy and place to be, if that makes any sense. The Moscato Moon, man, it can also connect any of us and all of us. When the next time you're outside, whether you're driving, flying, on a cruise ship, doesn't matter, wherever you are, when you see that big full moon, and it looks like you can touch it, you'll think Moscato Moon. And at that moment, you and I will be connected. And that connection can happen universally,
Cool. All right, folks, let's take a listen to Moscato Moon on the Jazz Flyte Podcast with our guest, BillyRay Sheppard. Welcome back to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I am Daryl Scott. Our guest today is BillyRay Sheppard. I brag about this. By way of San Antonio, Texas, we are getting out to many people in their homes and everything, and having a good time. And that's just a great tune. He gave us a great story about the energy of that. You spent a lot of time, and I don't know how you guys feel about this. I'll call it being a sideman with Reagan Whiteside, Willie Bradley, Lynn Roundtree, Peter White, Greg Manning, and so many more. Now you kind of stepped into the forefront being the leader. What do you take from those gigs with those people to your frontman personality?
Great question. Just to clarify, I didn't travel or tour with like the Reagan Whitesides or the Peter Whites, but I performed with them multiple occasions. Whenever they would come through the city, I would be picked up as the sax player for their band. And prior to getting to the jazz world, I was definitely a side man, just play saxophone when the solo comes up, and But from artists like those that you've mentioned, man, I would say what I've learned most from them that I hope that I'm able to incorporate in my music and my stage performance is their ability to connect with the audience, their ability to reach the audience and bring the audience into their show, into their world at that time, all of those, man. And the other thing too, man, the smooth jazz community I've discovered firsthand is a group of amazingly talented and warm, welcoming individuals,
Yes.
Which in the very, very beginning, I was kind of skeptical, and just not sure how I would be received when, I would approach some of the artists because, they were already established. My first CD was produced by Steve Oliver. And, I was like, man, Steve Oliver, he's a he's an A-list cat. He's already well established. He's where
Right.
I want to be. And I'm like, man, I don't know if he's really gonna, how he's gonna feel about, working with this cat that, self-taught, doesn't, really, just now breaking into or trying to break into the world of smooth jazz. And man, but he couldn't have been more accommodating, just as nice as he could be. Wonderful cat. And I've experienced that with everybody, man. Everybody, just great, great, great people in the smooth jazz community. Greg Manning, Blake Aaron, Willie Bradley, Laurie Williams, Nathan Mitchell. All of those people have just been so amazing, and the list goes on. I mean, Paula Atherton. So many people that I've been able to meet, play with, and just learn from, and gain, insight and information from. So,
It's funny. Half of those people that you named, we've had on the show. Paula Atherton is one of them, and Paula is what I will call Team Jazz Flyte. So she's always chiming in and sending this out and saying thank you for stuff like this. The one thing I can honestly say, when I was in radio and doing this show called Jazz Flyte 108, everybody that I talked to was very friendly, and I think that was the reason I kept wanting to talk to people and get to know people. Because don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this to be a jerk, but it's almost like you wanted somebody to be different. But the late Grover Washington was coming to town to a place called the Front Row Theater. He's going to play on a Saturday. On Friday, as I'm driving home from work, my phone rings, and it's Grover on the phone. Wow. And I'm like, serious? It's that thing where you go, no, it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
But it was him, and he's just like, hey, I'm in town. We're going to go grab something to eat at this place. Can you get there? You want to stop by? I'm going to say no. My other favorite Grover Washington story is it was 2 or 3 days after Nelson Mandela had been released. So I'm doing this interview, and you never know the scope of what you are aware of.
Sure.
So I go, I don't know if I should ask this question, but I go, what is the effect of Nelson Mandela being released mean to you? And there's like 7 seconds of silence. And I can see my head rolling off of my shoulder because he's going to chop it off. He goes, I've done 8 interviews today, and not one person has asked me about that. Let's talk.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, we're on the phone, so he can't really see my face, but
sure,
it makes you feel comfortable, and you find out stories and you find out things. And I'll do this first because I think this is going to be a long part. I want to talk to you about what is this thing called Second Sunday Smooth Jazz Series. Can you tell me what that's about?
Yeah. Well, as you know, you mentioned it earlier. There in Cleveland, the jazz scene is maybe could be better. Well, that's true here in San Antonio as well. There is a smooth jazz audience here, but it could be better.
Right.
So what I wanted to do, I wanted to figure out, what can I do to try to help that along, to try and grow the popularity for performers and for the audience here in San Antonio. So I put together what I call the Second Sunday, and the very first one, oh man, it was too much on the plate.
Right.
I wanted it to be an experience for all of the senses. I wanted to have a chef be part of it. I wanted a motivational speaker. I wanted an artist, whether it was a painter or a photographer, and of course the music, the band, and so all of this, And so the very, very first one that I did, I think had 12 people in the audience.
Wow.
And it was like, oh man, well, this I don't know. So anyway, I stuck with it. I tapered it over the years, and I kind of dialed it in to where it's a sit down dinner. It's a um, reserved seating, sit down dinner, and there's always a charity component associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've given over $60,000 through those efforts to local charities here in San Antonio. And what it is, it's an evening of concert, and initially it was just me and my band, and we would perform, the second Sunday of every month. And then I thought, okay, well, how can I make this grow? So then I started inviting other artists, national smooth jazz artists to perform with me or with the band. I'd bring them into town, and we do the same thing. We would do a concert, sit down dinner, and proceeds would go to the charity for that month.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. I just did the last one I did. It wasn't on Sunday, but it was still the same format. And I was fortunate enough to have Lori Williams from Atlanta. She was the vocalist, the featured vocalist. And I also have a big band. It's a 17-piece big band. It's a all-black big band, which, big bands are somewhat common here in San Antonio. There maybe about 10, maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
And but this is the only black one. And so I'm really proud of that. It's a bunch of amazing musicians. So we put on a great show. It was something San Antonio hadn't seen. We did a smooth jazz segment with my smaller group. Mm-hmm. And then we had dinner, and then the intermission, and then we opened back up with Lori and the big band. So it was a great experience. So yeah, that's what my second Sunday is all about. Basically, is presenting smooth jazz format, coupled with a dinner, and a great venue. Mm-hmm. That just always providing something to give back to the community. So that's what it's all about.
Don't get me wrong. In a later conversation, I might have to pick your brain about that, because that sounds like something we need to do here in Cleveland.
Sure.
All right, here's another sample of your music. This song's titled Silk. Yes. And you're going to hear it right now on the Jazz Flyte Podcast with our guest, BillyRay Sheppard. That is Silk. I've always liked that. All the songs have been kind of silky smooth. Our guest today is BillyRay Sheppard on the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I am Daryl Scott. BillyRay, let's do that. Let's talk about this. So what is your smooth jazz cruise?
Well, it's this will be my 8th smooth jazz cruise. It would have been my 10th. But of course, I had to cancel for COVID, and the year after, everything, that industry was shut down for those 2 years. But man, my cruise, okay, for those of you that don't know me, you'll soon find out that when I get an idea, kind of like you mentioned, when I get an idea and I think about, okay, am I going to wait until the idea develops and comes to me? Or am I going to take that idea and run with it and make it happen for me?
Right. Yeah.
And man, I have to do that, man, because I love music. I love what I do, and I love the connection with people. So I knew that I wanted to be part of a smooth jazz cruise, and I'm just me, and I know Dave Cause and all the other cruises are not going to reach out, more than likely. And if they were to reach out, they weren't going to reach out anytime soon.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, well, I got to do something myself, because I want this experience. I want to be able to be a part of it. So, I had a couple of meetings with some great friends of mine, and just talked about, how can we take this idea, basically my second Sunday, because the very first one was called Second Sunday at Sea. So I was like, how can I take this concert experience and build a cruise around it? So man, basically just through some meetings and some fortunate conversations and outcomes, I was able to do the first one, and then they've been rolling ever since, man. The next one is November 9th through the 16th, 17th. 16th. And this is great because this will be the first time that we've been on this ship. This is a MSC cruise line. This is their inaugural voyage out of Galveston. So it's our first as well as their first. So looking forward to it. But yeah, the cruise is great, man. I've had, oh man, such amazing artists on there. I've had Gino Rosaria, and I know I'm gonna miss some people.
Don't.
I've had, the list. You could go to my website and check out. But this year I'm gonna have Daryl Williams on bass. I'll have JJ Sanseverino on guitar. I'll have Nathan Mitchell on keys, and of course my band, and maybe even another surprise performer. So yeah, it's a great time, man. It's a 7-day cruise.
You're doing an awful lot. And looking at you and listening to you, I'm willing to bet we're in the same age range. Where do you find the energy?
Man, it's the passion. It's the passion, man. I just love it. I love it. There's nothing else I'd rather do. Obviously, there are things that I will do if I have to, if for some reason the music industry goes away for me, but there's nothing else I'd rather do. And I'm passionate about it, but there's so many things that I want to accomplish. That's part of the drive,
Right. Yeah.
I want to get, that Silk album. I had some numbers off the Silk album that actually made the top 20 on Billboard. I want something to get top 10, top 5, number 1, and I was joking about the Dave Cause, but yeah, I would love to get a call from Dave Cause, from the Smooth Jazz Cruise, from any of those. So there's so much that I want to do. I want people all over the world to enjoy my music, to know about my music. I want to put out more music, So yeah, part of my energy, all of my energy, comes from the drive to accomplish and achieve and grow and learn more. So
nice, man. Well, I tell you what, if you can keep Jazz Flyte in mind when you release these things, when it's new music, the cruises, the second Sundays, let us know and we'll put it out there and get it to all our fans.
And I appreciate you, man.
BillyRay Sheppard, man, it's been a pleasure because it's not often, for the most part, in my small bubble, it was Sanborn, Grover, Najee, Ramsey, those people like that. But when you go open up the whole spectrum, dude, there's so many of you that are playing music. It's hard to keep up. And I'm very happy to have met you and had a conversation with you. I hope that we will have more.
Oh, absolutely.
And we got some things to do, whether it's Texas or whether it's Ohio. I think you and I can come up with a plan for some things to do. Ladies and gentlemen, go ahead.
Let's make it happen. I said, let's make it happen, man.
Okay, man. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. That's me. I'm Daryl Scott. Our guest today has been BillyRay Sheppard. Please join us again next week, right here on the podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I hope you enjoy these stories and soulful melodies that grew through the doors of time. If you want to stay connected with the latest updates and episodes, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Until next time, I'm Daryl Scott.